Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel. Now this is the first video that I am filming in a matter of weeks because for a hot moment there, a very, very hot moment, it was the worst part of summer and I'm in the Australian outback, so often even at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning it is still over 40 degrees outside. So I was not filming videos, I was just focusing on trying to survive. And then about a week and a half ago, the people who were in charge of me, they asked me if I wanted to go to Bremer's Canyon. I was like, yes, of course I want to go to Bremer's Canyon. So if you don't know what Bremer's Canyon is, and I'm assuming that none of you do, Bremer's Canyon is about 40 kilometers off the shore of Western Australia. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it is the place where every summer the largest known gathering of orcas on Earth, they go through there to breed and socialize. And so I really wanted to go. So I spent a few days on a boat just in the middle of the ocean looking at these orcas, and it was great fun. But I figured if the people in charge of me are going to give me something like that, which I obviously very, very much wanted to do, then I best give them something in return. So hopefully they can learn something about a give and take relationship. And so let's discuss the end of the world. No, not so much the end of the world. I think peak human arrogance is this belief that we can destroy the world, as if we would ever have such a capability. That's like trying to say that a plankton can bring down a blue whale, like it's just never going to happen. The world has survived and thrived for billions of years before us, and it will continue to do so for billions of years after we're gone. So let's talk about the end of civilization. Yours, not mine. And I do hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your societies are not going to be brought down by a rogue dictator or nuclear war, and not even a Schwarzenegger-style AI uprising. No, quite embarrassingly, you lot are going to go and got done by the exact same thing that's been trying to kill humanity for thousands and thousands of years. A virus. And I'm not laughing because it's funny, I'm laughing because you'd expect as a society you all would have moved past this by now. After all, pandemics are absolutely nothing new to you. You eradicated smallpox and the Spanish influenza, and you somehow all managed to survive that time some guy ate a really bad bat wing soup in China, and you all collectively lost your mind and rose toilet paper stock prices to an all-time high. I mean, you guys have AI and quantum computing and billionaires playing space cowboy. Turns out none of that mattered. You haven't evolved past it, so let's break it down because, hey, knowledge is power even if there's nothing you can do with it. So, India. Home at this point to 1.6 billion people. Dense cities, rural villages, overwhelming poverty, and just enough government dysfunction to create perfect conditions for a viral outbreak. If you were to engineer a plague and release it into a lab, this would be the lab you would choose. Somewhere in a rat-infested food stall in Ghaziabad, or maybe in the lungs of an infected bat hanging over a crowded livestock farm in Ghaziabad, a mutation happened, but either way, it was in Ghaziabad. A teeny tiny imperceptible shift in an RNA strand, sort of like flipping a singular letter in a single word in a billion-page novel. Patient zero? I don't know. Some guy who worked in a fruit store, or maybe a factory worker who breathed in at the wrong time, and he felt a little sick, he coughed into his hand, and next thing he did was just hand over a rupee to a customer, and over the course of the next few days, that rupee continued to change hands, and the spread of necrovia commenced. Meanwhile, necrovia was making itself comfortable, rolling up its little microscopic sleeves and making itself at home in the respiratory tract, and the bloodstream, and just for funsies, the neurological system. It was in absolutely no rush to kill, and that's what made it so different from other viruses, and also so terrifying. This was not Ebola, and it was not SARS. Those viruses kill too fast, making the patient sick before they can even think about boarding a plane to go to Paris. Necrovia waited. It learned from the mistakes of its cousins, and then it took over the world. By the time the first cases had been identified, the world was already screwed. It just didn't know it yet. By that point, necrovia was already on 5 different continents, and the airports were absolutely packed with carriers. Businessmen and students and tourists, each of them carrying the end of civilization in their sinuses. Because that's the thing about humanity. We don't pay attention until people start dying in large enough numbers in locations we actually care about. And necrovia was in no rush. It did not want to kill you right away because that would have been stupid. First, it just sat quietly in the background, riding first class across continents, and then once it got to somewhere new, it spread pretty quickly through office buildings and train stations and schools. Like your coworker just coughed, or you just shook somebody's hand when they didn't wash it well enough. Well, congratulations, you just inherited your own little teeny tiny piece of the apocalypse. And at first it didn't seem like anything special, just a few scattered cases of some kind of mysterious pneumonia making the rounds, but Then it hit the nervous system, and that's when the fun began. They started hallucinating, and some of them became violently paranoid, attacking their friends and their families and their doctors and really whoever else was in their immediate vicinity. And people's lungs started filling up with blood and fluid, and they would start hemorrhaging from their brains and their GI tracts and their pores and everything in between. Some people, I don't know if you'd call them lucky or not, but they would go to bed one night completely fine, no symptoms at all. And by the next morning, they just stopped thinking and functioning and breathing. It's like people's bodies were breaking down piece by piece, total organ failure. The usual antivirals did absolutely nothing. Like, there was no treatment, there was no cure. It was just a very long and slow, agonizing death as doctors scrambled to try to figure out why young, healthy people were dropping dead in ICU beds. And the governments try to do what governments always try to do, which is too little, too late. So after a while, they tried to implement quarantines and travel bans and border controls. Like, you know what they try to do. You've lived through it yourself before. But it was already way too late for that. Like, the horse had already bolted. By the time they tried to lock the front door, the monster was already well and truly inside. So with optimal care, Necrobia had a fatality rate of about 60%, but by this point, there was no optimal care, so it was sitting more around like 90%. And you're probably wondering, where were all the geniuses, the AI overlords and the billionaires with their pharmaceutical companies that made their fortune selling allergy meds for 100 times the price? Well, they're all dead too. Like, Necrobia was killing everybody. And Necrobia wasn't just killing people, it was killing the infrastructure that was supposed to keep people alive. So the hospitals, they were the first to fall, and then the supply chains, they followed pretty quickly after that, because guess what? The people who deliver food and water and medicine, they get sick too. And that's when panic really started to, because there's nothing quite like people cottoning on to the fact that no one is coming to save them to really kick chaos into overdrive. So over the next few months, there was a lot of looting and rioting and martial law and governments really scrambling to maintain any sense of control that they had. And then the universe decided that it was going to kick us while we were down. So even before Necrobia, the world had been having a few issues for a matter of years at that point. And the only way that I can think to really describe it to you is that the universe was unhappy. And I don't mean this in a metaphorical, metaphysical, or spiritual sense. No, I mean it in the most literal sense that it can be taken in. The universe was not happy. And it had nothing to do with global warming. This went far beyond that. This was cosmic level shit. So this all happened, it was happening during as well, but it all started about 2 or 3 years before Necrobia. And I'm not saying that they're related at all, because they're not. Well, they're related in the sense that we're talking about the end of the world, but they're not related in one caused the other, or at least I doubt that it did. And I'm sure at first people did think that it was global warming related, but again, I don't think that it is. But there was just a lot of geophysical upheaval during that time. So there was a lot of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and weird weather patterns and auroras being in places where auroras aren't supposed to be, and just probably most notably a lot of really random radiation bursts. So it was kind of like the planet itself was throwing a tantrum. So I'm sure people did think at that time, to begin with, that it was global warming related. Then the stagnant energy in the atmosphere started to spike, and it started really, really small at first. So it would be your phone would die and turn into a brick, or the internet would go down for a day or two with no rhyme or reason or explanation that anyone could find. Things that on a local or personal level were really, really inconvenient and concerning, but at the time, not so much on a collective societal level. Until those energy spikes, they started to affect the power grids. Flash forward, we're now in the midst of the viral outbreak, and a month comes around that we call the mouth of darkness, which is the sun went down one night and then it did not rise again for 22 days. Now, reports of this are very conflicting. Some people say it was night, and some people just say it was really gloomy, it was dark outside, but it wasn't night dark. It was just the sky was covered and the sun couldn't pierce through. So I don't know. So over the course of those 22 days, there was multiple unprecedented radiation bursts, which completely altered the amount of stagnant energy that was in the atmosphere at the time, completely frying the electrical grid. And there was just a lot of things went wrong with that. So there was planes and satellites falling out of the sky, and crops were dying, and livestock were dying, and there was a lot of tectonic plate movement going on. So there was a lot of earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic activity, and it was just a really bad 22 days because you still had that virus going around as well. And put that all together, combine it all into one cake, well, it was just kind of like the final nail in the coffin. You never really recovered from it. I hope that doesn't sound like I'm being super shifty, because I don't know what happened in those 22 days. Was it a gamma burst? Was it a polar shift? Was it a mega eruption? I don't know. Nobody knows, because the people who were around at that time who would have known, like the scientists and the engineers and the physicists, they were either all A, dead by the time those 22 days came along, or B, they did put it down on paper, they did know what would happen, but unfortunately, as tends to happen during human history, as time went along, those 22 days kind of got scooped up as religion, and any evidence to the contrary would have been destroyed long before I came along, so I can't answer what the hell happened there. So there you have it. That is the end of the world. Well, your world at least. There was no Hollywood apocalypse, there was no heroic last stand or plucky survivors with their shotguns and their canned beans and endless supply of razor blades to shave the women's armpits with. No, it was just a very long and sad happening. You know, you just mix in a virus and cosmic event, and human stupidity will take care of the rest. But anyway, that's all I've got for you tonight. So as always, this is Casey signing off. Stay safe out there, stay weird, and don't lose any sleep over this, because for the majority of you, this is not something you need to be worrying about.